I was supposed to be celebrating 70 years of life, 70 years of sacrifice, resilience, and loyalty. Instead, as I blew out the candles that night, my own son leaned close, pressed something into my palm, and whispered so quietly that only I could hear, "Move out by midnight." My hand trembled as I opened the small folded paper. It was not a birthday card, not a blessing, not even a note of gratitude. It was a written demand in his neat handwriting, cold and deliberate, giving me a deadline like I was some unwelcome tenant, not the woman who had carried him into this world. Move out by midnight. The words bled into me like acid searing through 70 years of motherhood in an instant. I stood frozen, the party noise blurring into a dull roar around me. Children laughed. Glasses clinked. My daughter-in-law's shrill voice rose above the others as she orchestrated the evening like a conductor of cruelty. No one noticed the small, crumpled note in my hand. No one saw the way my eyes burned as if 1,000 needles were stabbing behind them. They only saw an old woman standing too stiffly, smiling too tightly, pretending that the candles she had just blown out symbolized joy instead of betrayal. I have spent a lifetime in silence, a lifetime of biting my tongue so my children could feel powerful, of working double shifts to pay for their education, of stitching clothes in the dead of night so they would never feel the shame of poverty. And this was my reward. A note telling me to leave my own home. A note from the boy whose first shoes I sewed by hand, whose fevers I nursed until my body collapsed with exhaustion. A note from the man who once clung to me at the school gates, crying that he never wanted to let me go. Now he was the one letting me go with a smile plastered on his face, pretending the birthday party was about me when it was really about erasing me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the tablecloth from under the plates, let the cake splatter on the floor, grab my son by the collar and shout, "How dare you?" But I didn't. My voice failed me. I stood there with the note in my hand and my heart in my throat, staring at the boy I once thought would protect me when my bones grew brittle and my hair turned white. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just poured himself another drink, his wife's hand on his shoulder. Her nails painted blood red like a signature of guilt. How do you tell strangers the story of your humiliation? How do you confess that your own flesh and blood has betrayed you in such a calculated, cruel way that the people you gave your life to are now pushing you out like unwanted furniture? Would you survive that kind of betrayal, or would you collapse under the weight of it? Tell me, if it happened to you, what would you do? Would you leave quietly with your suitcase, or would you fight? I clutched that note all through the evening, every laugh, every cheer, every toast stabbing deeper. And as the night dragged on, I remembered every small cut that had led me here, every whispered conversation between my son and his wife that stopped when I walked into the room, every time she complained about how much space I was taking up, every time she asked casually if I had considered moving into a senior home, as though I were some fragile relic ready to be archived. I thought of the time she corrected me at the dinner table, telling me not to serve my own grandchildren too much dessert because they needed discipline, as if she had forgotten who had taught her to hold a spoon when she first joined our family. I thought of the way my son laughed when she made jokes about old people slowing down the household. Those laughs, those words, they weren't random. They were rehearsals for tonight. I stared at my birthday cake as they sang to me the flames of 70 candles, flickering, melting down into waxy puddles. And in that moment, as everyone's voices rose in fake cheer, I knew. I knew that this night wasn't about celebration. It was about eviction. It was about erasing me. And yet, as the sugar scent filled the room and the light flickered on my wrinkled face, I also knew something else. I had been waiting for this. Deep down, I had known this day would come. And unlike them, I was prepared. I didn't cry. Not in front of them. I smiled for the pictures. I cut the cake. I fed my granddaughter a piece, let her smudge frosting on my cheek. But inside, every nerve in my body was coiled like a spring. They thought I was weak. They thought I was alone. They thought I had nowhere to go. They were wrong. You see, silence can be power. For years, I have listened, observed, collected. For years, while they whispered about me, I was making my own plans. They mistook my quiet for weakness. They mistook my wrinkles for surrender. But 70 years teaches you something that youth will never understand: patience. And patience is a weapon sharper than any knife. That night, after the last guest left, after the dishes were stacked and the champagne bottles rolled half empty on the counter, I sat in my chair with the note in my hand and the clock ticking loudly on the wall. Move out by midnight. Midnight was only a few hours away. They thought they had cornered me. They thought I would pack my bags humiliated and disappear into the night. But they had underestimated the woman who raised them. Because I had a secret I had been holding close, waiting for the day they would try to break me. A secret that would turn their triumph into ash. And as the house grew quiet and my son and his wife retreated to their bedroom, satisfied with their cruelty, I whispered to myself, "You want me gone by midnight. Then midnight will be the moment your world collapses." So I ask you, what would you do if your child betrayed you on your 70th birthday in front of everyone, pretending to celebrate while handing you an eviction notice? Would you bow your head and walk out quietly, or would you fight back? Comment 1 if you believe no mother should ever be treated this way. Like this story, if you believe betrayal has consequences. Because this isn't just a confession, this is a warning, and the storm has only begun. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. Betrayal like this doesn't come out of nowhere. It grows in silence like mold creeping through the walls of a house, invisible at first, but deadly once it spreads. That birthday note may have been the final blow, but the poison had been dripping into my life for months, maybe years. The first signs were small, almost laughable if they hadn't cut so deep. I still remember the first time I caught my daughter-in-law measuring the hallway with her eyes. She thought I wasn't watching, but I saw her. Her lips moving silently as if calculating square footage, her fingers brushing against the walls like a realtor inspecting property she was about to list. When she noticed me in the doorway, she smiled too brightly and said, "Oh, I was just thinking how we could redecorate. Don't you think this hallway feels a little too old-fashioned?" I laughed it off. But something in her tone made my stomach twist. She wasn't talking about wallpaper. She was talking about me. Another night, I found my son whispering on the phone in the kitchen. He didn't know I was awake, but age teaches you the habit of waking at odd hours. His voice was low, urgent. "Yes, she still lives here." "No, not yet. I just need her to agree." He paused and then whispered even softer. "She'll sign eventually. She's getting weaker." I stood in the hallway barefoot, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. I wanted to storm in and demand, "Sign what? What are you planning?" But I didn't. Instead, I turned silently back to my room, carrying the heavy knowledge that something was being plotted under my own roof. Little by little, the signs stacked up like bricks in a wall, separating me from my own son. Once at dinner, I overheard her telling him, if we sold this place, we could finally move into a neighborhood we deserve. Imagine a bigger kitchen, a backyard pool. She said it so casually with her fork poised midair, as if my entire existence were just a line item on their dream list. My son shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't disagree. He never disagreed with her. And then came the mail. For years, I had been the one to collect it, a small routine that made me feel useful. But suddenly, she insisted on taking that job. "Don't worry, you shouldn't have to walk out in the cold," she said sweetly, her painted smile stretching too wide. At first, I believed her kindness. But one morning, I woke early and reached the mailbox before she did. There, tucked between bills and advertisements, was a thick envelope from a law firm. My name wasn't on it. My son's was. And when I handed it to him, he snatched it from my hand so quickly, so violently, that I felt my skin sting from the brush of his fingers. "Private?" he muttered, avoiding my eyes. My daughter-in-law's gaze darted between us, sharp and calculating. That was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining things. They were preparing something legal, something final. You don't forget moments like that. They etch themselves into your bones, carving deep grooves of dread. I began noticing everything, their whispered conversations, their sudden silences, when I entered a room the way their children, my grandchildren, began parroting phrases they must have overheard. Grandma's old, my granddaughter, once said, bluntly, while coloring at the table, "Mom says she should rest in a smaller place." The innocence of her voice nearly broke me. Children don't lie, they repeat. And she had repeated the truth. Every sign was a needle stitching together a cruel tapestry. But the sharpest needle of all came one rainy afternoon. I had just returned from grocery shopping carrying heavy bags that made my back ache. As I pushed the door open, I heard laughter, hers high and mocking, his low and uneasy. I paused, hidden by the door frame, and listened. She doesn't even realize my daughter-in-law said, "We'll tell her it's for her own good that she can't handle the stairs anymore. And if she resists, well, we have ways." My son said nothing. Only the sound of his glass clinking against the table, the heavy sigh that told me he wasn't resisting either. I stood there dripping rainwater onto the floor, the groceries slipping from my hands, and thought they've already decided. My home is no longer mine in their minds. I am already a guest, a burden, an obstacle. Do you see it now? The note on my birthday wasn't an accident. It was the last act in a play that had been rehearsed for months. They thought I was too blind to see the rehearsals, too old to understand the whispers. But I saw. I heard. I understood everything. And still I said nothing. Not yet. Because silence, as I told you before, is a weapon. Every time they whispered, I memorized. Every time they laughed, I recorded it in my mind like a ledger of cruelty. Every time they treated me like a guest in my own home, I sharpened my patience like a blade. So when that note fell into my hand on the night of my 70th birthday, I wasn't shocked. I was devastated, yes, but not surprised. The betrayal had been blooming like a poisonous flower all along. The only question was, would I let it choke me, or would I cut it down at the root? Now tell me, if you were in my place seeing the signs pile up like storm clouds, would you have confronted them earlier, or would you have done what I did? Wait, watch, collect, comment 1, if you believe waiting for the right moment is the strongest move. Like this story, if you think betrayal must be confronted the second you sense it. Because, as you'll soon see, my silence was not weakness. It was strategy. And the night of my birthday was not the end of their plan, it was the beginning of mine. The first signs had already cracked my heart, but what came next widened the fracture into a canyon. I wasn't the only one who had noticed something strange in the house. Sometimes the truth doesn't come from those you love, but from the people who stand quietly at the edges, watching more clearly than you realize. One evening, just a week after the birthday party, I heard a soft knock on my kitchen door. It wasn't the front door, the one my son and his wife liked to control, deciding who came and went, but the small side door that opened onto the garden. When I pulled it open, I found my neighbor, Mrs. Keller, standing there with a nervous expression, clutching her cardigan tightly around her shoulders. She had lived next door for 30 years, and though we were never the closest of friends, we had shared countless cups of tea and exchanged favors during storms and holidays. That night, her face was pale, her eyes darting to the windows of my house, as if afraid of being seen. "I didn't want to say anything," she whispered, "but I think you need to know." I invited her in, sat her at the small wooden table, poured her tea with hands that trembled more from dread than age. And then she told me what she had overheard. She had been watering her flowers by the fence 2 days earlier when she heard voices carrying from my kitchen window, my son's and my daughter-in-law's. She admitted she hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the words had been too loud, too sharp to ignore. They were talking about papers, she said, her voice low, her hands twisting the hem of her cardigan. Legal papers. Your daughter-in-law was saying something about a transfer of ownership. She said once you were out, the house would be theirs. She even joked about how quickly she'd redecorate, said she'd finally get rid of the old furniture. And then she laughed. She laughed so loud I could hear it clear across my garden. I sat frozen, the tea untouched in front of me, my breath caught in my throat. My neighbor reached across the table and gripped my hand. "I don't mean to meddle," she said, "but I couldn't stay quiet. You've always been kind to me. You deserve to know what they're planning." The words struck me like thunder. Papers. Transfer of ownership. Laughter. I had suspected it. Of course, I had seen the envelope from the law firm, felt the chill of whispered conversations, but hearing it confirmed by someone else was different. It was like the final veil had been pulled back, revealing not just suspicion, but fact. I thanked her, my voice steadier than I felt. After she left, I sat alone at the table for a long time, staring at the steam rising from the untouched tea. My house felt different that night. No longer a place of warmth, but a stage where every smile, every laugh, every word was part of a script I hadn't written. But the betrayal didn't end there. A few days later, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. This time, it wasn't from a neighbor, but from someone even closer to home, my own granddaughter. Children notice things. They see the cracks adults try to plaster over. That afternoon, she was coloring at the kitchen table while her parents were out. She leaned close to me, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Grandma," she said, "Mommy says soon we'll have a bigger house, with a pool." She looked at me with innocent eyes, her crayon still moving on the paper. "But Daddy said we don't have the money. Mommy told him not to worry because once you move, everything will be fine." I felt my heart stop. Even the children knew. Even in their innocent chatter, the betrayal was seeping into the next generation. I smiled weakly at her, not wanting to show the storm raging inside me. "That sounds lovely," I said, my voice trembling. "Pools are nice in the summer." But inside, my hands clenched into fists. They weren't just planning to erase me. They were teaching their children that erasing me was natural, inevitable, something to be celebrated. That night, lying awake in my bed, I stared at the ceiling and replayed my granddaughter's words over and over. "Once you move, everything will be fine." To her, it was just a sentence. To me, it was the echo of a plot that had stretched beyond whispers and paperwork. It had become a family story, a narrative in which I was already written out. And then came the moment that sealed it all. I was returning from the grocery store again, the bags heavy in my hands when I heard my son's voice drifting from the living room. He was on the phone, pacing his words sharp with tension. "Yes, she's still here." "No, we can't push her too hard, not yet. Just wait until the papers are ready." He paused and then added in a voice that broke me, "She won't fight. She doesn't have the strength." I stood there in the hallway, the groceries digging into my arms, my breath caught in my chest. He didn't know I was listening. He didn't know I had already pieced together the puzzle from the neighbor, from my granddaughter, from the whispers in the night. He didn't know that the woman he thought was too weak to fight was already preparing for war. But I said nothing, not yet, because timing is everything. Now let me ask you if your neighbor warned you, if your grandchild repeated the words of betrayal, if you overheard your own son planning to strip you of your home. What would you do? Would you confront them, immediately explode with rage, demand answers? Or would you wait? Gather every shred of proof, let the noose tighten until they didn't even realize it was around their own necks. Comment 1 if you believe silence can be the most dangerous weapon. Like this story, if you think betrayal must be faced head-on the moment it appears. Because as I stood there clutching those grocery bags, my son's voice echoing in my ears, I made my choice. I would not scream, I would not beg, I would not collapse, I would wait, I would watch, and when the time came, I would make sure they understood exactly who they had underestimated. There's a difference between whispers behind your back and words said to your face. Whispers wound, but when betrayal grows bold enough to step into the light, that's when it truly burns. Round after round, they were pushing me closer to the edge, and in this round, they made sure I felt it in the open under the full weight of their contempt. It began at dinner one evening, a week after my neighbor's warning and my granddaughter's innocent confession. The table was set, the smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen, and I had laid out the plates like I always did, an old habit I couldn't seem to break. My daughter-in-law sat down, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping against the table with impatience. My son slid into his chair beside her, looking tired, worn down, but unwilling to speak against her. As I served the food, she sighed loudly. "You know, Mom," she said, drawing out the word "mom" with the kind of sharp sweetness that could cut glass. "This house is really getting too crowded. Don't you think it would be better for everyone if you had your own little place, something smaller, easier for you to manage?" I froze, the serving spoon still in my hand. My son didn't look up. He just poked at his plate as if the peas were suddenly the most fascinating thing in the world. My heart pounded, my cheeks flushed. I wanted to ask, "And what about all the years I've managed this place? What about the nights I cleaned while you slept? The mornings I cooked while you dressed your children?" But I stayed silent, watching her lips curl into that smug smile. She leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine, and added, "Besides, you could use the rest. At your age, climbing these stairs every day can't be safe. We just want what's best for you." Her words dripped with false concern, but her eyes betrayed her. There was no care there, only calculation. My son nodded faintly, still not meeting my gaze. It was then that I realized I wasn't just fighting her. I was fighting the silence of the man I had raised. That dinner was only the beginning. The next day, I found that my things had been moved from the closet in the hallway. My coats, my scarves, my umbrellas, all shoved into a small box and placed at the foot of my bed. When I asked about it, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, I thought we could use the space for storage. You don't mind, do you?" She didn't wait for my answer. She had already decided that my presence was less important than her empty boxes. Then came the birthdays of my grandchildren. I had always been the one to bake the cakes, to wrap the presents, to tell stories that made their eyes light up with wonder. But this time I wasn't invited to plan. The party was held in the backyard, and while children ran laughing around balloons and streamers, I stood at the window watching through the glass like an intruder. No one asked me to join in the photographs. No one asked me to cut the cake. My daughter-in-law's friends crowded the yard, smiling politely at me, as though I were a guest they didn't know what to do with. Later that night, I overheard her laughing with one of her friends. She looked so lost standing there. Honestly, it's like having another child to take care of, except this one doesn't listen. Her friend laughed, and I felt my chest tighten, my breath catch. I wanted to scream, to storm outside, to remind them of who I was. But the words stuck in my throat, heavy with years of silence. Isolation became their weapon. They began locking doors, closing blinds, whispering even when I entered a room. I would walk into the living room and feel the air thicken. Conversations dropping to murmurs, eyes refusing to meet mine. My own son began spending longer hours at work, or so he claimed. I wondered if he stayed away simply to avoid the shame of facing me. And then came the cruelest moment of all. It was a Sunday, the one day I cherished most, because it meant a family meal, laughter, stories, the comfort of tradition. But that Sunday, as I set the table, my daughter-in-law walked in and said, "Oh, didn't we tell you we're going out today? Just us." She smiled as she slipped her purse over her shoulder. "We thought it would be good for the kids to have time with their parents alone. You understand, don't you?" She closed the door behind her, and I stood there in the kitchen, the table set for 6, the roast in the oven, the smell of herbs filling the room. I looked at the empty chairs and felt the silence press against me like a weight. They had cut me out completely, not just from the house, but from the family I had built with my own hands. That night, lying in bed, I let the tears come. Hot, furious tears that stained the pillow, tears of grief and betrayal and humiliation. For 70 years, I had lived with dignity, and now I was being treated like a burden, an afterthought, a shadow fading at the edge of their lives. And yet, even as the tears fell, something inside me hardened. Each humiliation was fuel. Each cruel word was fire. They thought they were breaking me. They thought isolation would make me weaker. But what they didn't know was that loneliness can sharpen resolve. Pain can forge steel. and I was no longer the soft, silent woman they thought they controlled. Now I ask you if your family set the table without you, if they pushed your things into boxes, if they laughed while you stood outside looking in. What would you do? Would you beg for scraps of affection, or would you bide your time, sharpen your patience, and prepare for the moment to strike comment one if you believe humiliation can turn into power? Like this story, if you believe silence is never the same as surrender. Because as they locked me out of their lives, they unknowingly locked themselves into my plan. And soon they would discover that the woman they thought was weak, isolated, and defeated was the same woman who would burn their carefully laid schemes to the ground. There comes a point when cruelty stops being subtle and becomes bold when whispers and smirks turn into open war. That point arrived one stormy evening when they finally showed me exactly how little they valued me, not as a mother, not as a woman, not even as a human being. The house was shaking with the sound of wind and rain. I had lit candles in the kitchen, the only warm corner left that felt like mine. My son and his wife came in late, drenched from an outing I hadn't even been told about. She dropped her wet coat onto the chair I usually sat in, claiming even that small space as hers. While he carried in a folder of papers, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. I didn't speak at first. I just poured them both tea because that's what mothers do even when their hearts are breaking. But she waved the cup away and snapped, "We need to talk." She pulled the folder from his hands and spread its contents across the table. Contracts, forms, documents stamped with official seals. My name was there, typed in neat black ink, like an object being transferred, not a person being respected. She tapped her nails against one page and said coldly, "It's time to make things official. We need you to sign this." My hands shook as I reached for the paper. It was a release of ownership, a legal surrender of the house. "If you just sign here," she said, her smile thin, "we can take care of everything. You'll be more comfortable in a smaller place. And this house, well, we'll finally be able to put it to good use." I looked at my son, praying for him to stop her, to tell me it wasn't true, that this wasn't happening. But he just stared at his hands, his silence louder than any words could have been. My throat closed, my chest ached, and for the first time in years, I felt truly old. Not because of the lines on my face or the ache in my bones, but because of the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. I whispered, "You want me gone." My son flinched but didn't deny it. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "We're giving you options, that's all. Either you sign or things will get difficult. We can't keep living like this." Difficult. The word hung in the air like a knife. I folded the paper carefully, my fingers trembling, and slid it back across the table. "Not tonight," I said quietly. Her lips curled into a sneer. "You're just delaying the inevitable. You think you can hold on, but you can't. You don't have anyone left, do you?" Her words sliced deeper than the storm outside. I excused myself, retreating to my room like a soldier stumbling from the battlefield, wounded, but not yet dead. When the door closed behind me, I collapsed onto the bed, the sobs tearing out of me so violently that I had to press a pillow to my mouth to muffle the sound. I cried until my chest burned, until my eyes ached, until I thought there was nothing left inside me but dust. Alone in the dark, I remembered every sacrifice I had made for them. I remembered the nights I skipped meals so my son could eat, the mornings I walked to work in shoes with holes while he went to school in polished ones, the years I paid off the mortgage brick by brick, hour by hour, paycheck by paycheck. And now, here I was being told I was a burden in the very house I had built with my hands. For a moment, I wanted to give in, to sign to leave, to disappear quietly and let the storm carry me away. I am not ashamed to say that I considered it, that the weight of their cruelty pressed so heavy on me that I wondered if maybe they were right, that maybe I was nothing more than an old woman taking up space. But then something shifted. It was small at first, like the flicker of a candle refusing to die. I thought of my grandchildren, their innocent faces looking to me for comfort, for stories, for love. I thought of my late husband whose last words to me were, "Take care of the house. It's yours." I thought of the generations before me of my mother who scrubbed floors so I could go to school, of my father who died with calloused hands from laboring in the fields. No, I would not be erased. Not by my own son. Not by a woman who married into this family and mistook kindness for weakness. I wiped my tears and sat up straighter. They thought I was broken, but I was only bending. They thought I had no fight left, but my fight had only just begun. Still, the days that followed pressed me harder. My daughter-in-law grew bolder, louder, crueler. She complained about the way I folded laundry, about the way I seasoned food, about the way I hummed to myself while washing dishes. Every little thing became a weapon to push me closer to the edge. One morning, I found a new lock on the storage room. My storage room where I had kept mementos of my life photo albums, quilts, letters. "We needed the space," she said coldly when I asked. "Don't worry, your things are safe. For now." The way she lingered on those last two words made my blood run cold. Another night, they went out to dinner without me and returned with takeout boxes. They ate in the living room, laughing while I sat in the kitchen, alone with a cold cup of tea. My son glanced at me, once guilt flickering across his face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The final blow came 2 weeks later. I walked into the living room to find my suitcase, my old worn suitcase packed and sitting by the door. Inside were my clothes folded neatly, but with an air of finality, as if they had already decided I was gone. On top of the suitcase lay another note, shorter this time, colder. "You need to leave. This is our home now." My knees buckled. I sat down on the couch, the suitcase glaring at me like a coffin filled with memories. My son stood nearby, his face pale, his hands clenched. He didn't look at me. She stood beside him, her arm looped through his, smiling like the victor of a battle that hadn't even ended yet. I wanted to shout, to scream, to tear that note into shreds and throw it at her feet, but I didn't. I looked at my son, the boy I had once held against my chest, the man I had once believed would protect me, and I asked, quietly, "Is this what you want?" His lips parted, but no sound came, and in his silence I heard the loudest answer of all. I carried the suitcase back to my room that night, my body shaking with rage, my mind swirling with despair. I thought I would break. I thought this was the end. But as I sat on the bed staring at the note, I felt something shift again. Not just the flicker of a candle this time, but the steady glow of a fire. They thought I was weak. They thought I was cornered. They thought they had won. But they were wrong. Because midnight was approaching, and midnight would not be the end of me. It would be the beginning of them seeing exactly who I truly was. Now tell me, if your own child packed your suitcase and told you to leave, would you obey? Or would you stand even if it meant standing alone and show them that betrayal has a cost? Comment 1, if you believe no parent should ever be discarded. Like this story, if you believe those who betray will always face consequences. Because the night they thought they had broken me was the very night I began to sharpen my plan. And when the time came, they would learn that some storms don't destroy you. They forge you into steel. I had spent weeks in silence, absorbing every cut, every insult, every humiliation. My tears had dried into something harder than sorrow. That night, when I carried the suitcase back to my room, I finally understood what my next step had to be. They thought I had nowhere to go, that I was powerless, that I would sign whatever paper they slid in front of me. But what they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment long before they ever imagined turning against me. I opened the suitcase they had packed for me. My clothes, folded with false politeness, lay stacked like corpses of a life they were trying to bury. I dug beneath them, my fingers brushing against the lining, until they found the small metal box I had hidden years ago. Inside were documents, bank statements, property deeds, letters from my lawyer. Proof that the house was not theirs to take, proof that I was not the helpless old woman they believed me to be. My husband and I had always been careful. He used to tell me, Never let all your security rest in one place. People change. Circumstances change. Protect yourself. After his death, I followed that advice. Quietly, without telling my son, I had bought a small apartment across town, modest, but entirely mine. I had put it under my name alone. I had also updated my will, not the version my son thought he had seen, but a different one locked away with my attorney. And in that will, every detail of my assets was protected from greedy hands. As I unfolded the papers under the dim lamplight, a strange calm settled over me. I was no longer trapped. I had a way out, and more importantly, I had a way to fight back. My silence had not been weakness. It had been strategy. And now the time had come to reveal what I had been holding. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Mr. Dalton, a man I had trusted for decades. His voice on the phone was steady, reassuring. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I told you years ago this day might come. I'm glad you kept everything safe. Now let's put it to use." I met him in his office that afternoon, the suitcase by my side, but this time filled not with clothes, but with proof. He reviewed the documents, carefully nodding as he flipped through the pages. "They have no claim," he said firmly. "This house is in your name, fully paid, legally protected. Any attempt to transfer ownership without your consent would be fraud. And as for the apartment, that's yours as well. You're not only secure, you're in control." The words lifted a weight from my chest, but they also ignited a fire. Control. For the first time in months, I felt the ground solid beneath my feet. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing to strike. Mr. Dalton leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "The question is, do you want to confront them now or let them expose themselves further? Sometimes letting people dig their own graves makes the victory sweeter." I thought of my daughter-in-law's laughter, of my son's silence, of the note that demanded I leave my home on my 70th birthday, and I knew the answer. "Let them dig," I said quietly. That night, back in my room, I looked at the packed suitcase still sitting by the door. They thought they had exiled me. They thought they had already won. But what they didn't know was that I had already moved my most important belongings to the apartment across town. Family photographs, jewelry from my mother, my husband's letters, everything of value had been secured long before. What they had packed for me was just fabric and thread. The soul of my life was safe, waiting for me in the sanctuary I had built in secret. For the first time in months, I slept without tears. I dreamed of my husband's voice, steady and warm. Patience, love. Patience is power. The following days, I continued my performance. I let them believe I was shrinking, that their pressure was working. I walked quietly through the halls. I kept my head down at meals. I let them sneer without reply. But inside, every detail was being recorded, every word cataloged. I even began keeping a small journal, writing down dates, times, conversations, the moments they revealed too much. One evening, my son's voice reached me through the thin walls of the house. "We just need her to sign," he said. "Once that's done, we're free." And my daughter-in-law's answer chilled me. "She will, she's weak, and if she doesn't, well, there are ways to prove she's not fit to make decisions." I wrote it all down, every word, evidence, not just memory. They thought they were cornering me, but they were walking straight into the trap of their own arrogance. And now I ask you, what would you do if you had the papers, the proof, the power to strike back, but your betrayers believed you were helpless? Would you reveal it immediately, crush their schemes in an instant? Or would you wait, let them drown in their own cruelty, until the moment of revelation cuts? Deepest comment 1, if you believe patience is the sharpest blade. Like this story, if you think truth should be revealed the second it's in your hands. Because I had chosen patience. I had chosen silence as my weapon. And as I folded the documents back into the metal box that night, I whispered to myself, "The storm is coming. And this time, it won't break me. It will break them." It happened on a night so still, so ordinary, that no one would have guessed it would become the battlefield where silence ended. The children were asleep. The dishes stacked the house, wrapped in that uneasy quiet that always comes when betrayal simmers beneath the surface. My son was in the kitchen, hunched over a cup of coffee, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, remembering the boy who once begged me to chase away his nightmares. Now he was the one who had become my nightmare. I stepped into the kitchen, the floor creaking under my weight. He looked up, startled guilt flashing across his face like lightning. "Mom," he said softly, as if the word might heal the wounds he'd carved into me. But I didn't let him speak further. I placed the folder of documents onto the table, the papers fanning out like blades. "Read them," I said, my voice steady, sharper than I'd ever let it be before. He frowned, confused, then reached for the first page. His hands trembled as his eyes moved across the words: property deeds, bank statements, legal letters. Each page tore away the illusion he had been clinging to, the illusion that I was powerless, that I had nowhere else to go, that I could be pushed out like an unwanted guest. "This house is mine," I said, my voice low, unwavering, "legally, fully, irrevocably. And the apartment across town is mine too. I am not the helpless old woman your wife whispers about. I am the owner. I am the one who built this life, and I am not leaving." He looked up at me, then his eyes wide, his mouth opening and closing like a child caught stealing. "Mom!" I didn't what I snapped. The fury in my voice surprised even me. "Didn't plan to steal from me? Didn't stand by while your wife mocked me, humiliated me, treated me like I was nothing? Didn't put that note in my hand on my birthday telling me to leave the house I paid for?" He flinched, his coffee sloshing onto the table. "That wasn't me. It was your silence," I cut in. "Silence is as loud as betrayal's son. Every time you looked away, every time you let her speak for you, every time you let her poison my place in this family without saying a word, you were part of it. You let her sharpen the knife, and you held me down while she pressed it against my throat." His face crumpled. For a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who once clung to me at the school gates. But that boy had grown into a man who thought betrayal was easier than honesty. And I had no pity left. "You wanted me gone," I said, leaning forward, my eyes locked on his. "But look around you. Every brick of this house is mine. Every memory, every scar on these walls belongs to me. And you will not erase me. Not now. Not ever." He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I didn't want this, Mom. I didn't know how to stop her." I almost laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. "You didn't know how to stop her. You're my son, my blood. You didn't need to stop her. You needed to stand with me. But you chose her greed over my dignity. And that choice has consequences." He looked up again, his eyes red, his lips trembling. "What are you going to do?" I gathered the papers back into the folder, sliding them neatly into place. "You'll see. But understand this, I am not the one on trial anymore. You are. And when the truth comes out, it won't just be between us. Everyone will know what you let happen under this roof." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "Mom, please, don't ruin everything. Everything I whispered. You call this everything: a house, stolen a mother, discarded a family, poisoned by lies. That is not everything. That is nothing. And it ends now." The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. He stared at me as though seeing me for the first time, as though realizing the mother he thought he could break was made of steel he could never bend. I picked up the folder and turned toward the door. Before I left the kitchen, I paused and looked back. "I gave you life. I gave you love. I gave you everything I had, and you gave me betrayal. Remember this, son, betrayal always comes with a price." I left him there, hunched over the table, his face buried in his hands, the sound of his quiet sobs following me down the hallway. For the first time in months, I felt no pity, only clarity. Now I ask you, if your child betrayed you and you had the proof in your hands, would you show mercy, or would you show them the steel they had mistaken for weakness? Comment 1. If you believe betrayal should always meet truth. Like this story if you think mercy has no place when dignity is on the line. Because that night in the kitchen was not the end. It was only the beginning. The private confrontation had cracked the walls of their lies, but the public reckoning was still to come. And when it did, no amount of silence or sobbing would save them from the storm I was about to unleash. The private confrontation in the kitchen had left my son in tears, but tears don't erase betrayal. His silence had carved the wound, and his wife's cruelty had salted it. I knew the time had come to take the truth out of the shadows. It was no longer just between us. It had to be seen, heard, and judged in the open. The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. My daughter-in-law had arranged a family dinner the following weekend. She called it a celebration, though no one explained what we were celebrating. I knew what it really was, a victory feast she had planned long before, when she believed I'd be gone by now. She wanted the house, the spotlight, the story of her triumph. What she didn't know was that I had been preparing for my own reveal. The evening began with laughter that felt rehearsed, forced, brittle. The table was set extravagantly, wine glasses shining, candles flickering, food arranged like an offering to greet itself. Her friends were there, their voices rising in shallow admiration, and even a few extended relatives had come drawn by the promise of a feast. I sat quietly at the end of the table, the place of least honor my fork, untouched my eyes, fixed on the flames dancing in the candles. Halfway through the meal, she rose with her glass in hand. To new beginnings, she announced, her voice dripping with pride. To family, to growth, and to finally moving forward. Everyone clinked their glasses, smiling, nodding, pretending to understand. My son sat beside her, his face pale, his eyes darting to me and then back to his plate. He knew what was coming. I let the room settle, let the false laughter ripple once more, and then I stood. The scrape of my chair against the floor silenced the chatter. All eyes turned to me. I placed a folder on the table, the same folder I had shown my son days earlier, and opened it with deliberate care. "You speak of new beginnings," I said, my voice calm but cutting through the room like a blade. "But perhaps it's time we speak of truths instead." The air thickened. She narrowed her eyes, her glass still raised. "What are you doing?" she hissed. I lifted the first document, holding it up so the candlelight illuminated the official seal. "This house," I began, "belongs to me. Legally. Fully. Irrevocably. Every attempt to suggest otherwise is a lie, and every scheme to take it from me is fraud." A murmur spread across the table. Her friends leaned forward, whispers darting like sparks. My son's face turned red, his hands gripping the edge of the table. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "She's confused. Ignore her. Age has clouded her mind." I laid down the second document firmer this time. "Confused. Is that what you told my son? That I was weak, senile, unfit? Did you tell him that signing away my house would be for my own good? Did you tell him lies until he began to believe them?" Her laughter faltered. A flicker of panic crossed her face. I leaned forward, my voice gaining strength. "I have every conversation written down, every insult, every threat, every plan you whispered in the dark. And I have witnesses, neighbors who heard your schemes through open windows, children who repeated your words without even knowing the cruelty they carried. You didn't just try to erase me, you taught the next generation to believe it was right." The room had gone silent. Only the candles flickered, the wax dripping down like slow tears. My son finally spoke, his voice breaking. "Mom, please." "Please," what I asked, turning my gaze to him. "Please keep silent. Please let her destroy me so you don't have to face your shame." "No, son. Silence is over. Tonight you will all hear the truth." I revealed the final paper, the deed to the apartment I had kept hidden, the sanctuary I had built in secret. Gasps filled the room as I laid it down. "Even if you succeeded in stealing this house, I would never be homeless. You thought you had me cornered, but I was already free. And now everyone here knows it." Her face drained of color. She tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. One of her friends whispered, "Is it true?" Another shook her head in disbelief. The weight of public judgment pressed down on her like iron. I wasn't finished. I turned to the relatives, to the friends gathered at the table. For months, I endured humiliation. I was pushed out of rooms, stripped of my place, treated like furniture to be discarded. On my 70th birthday, I was given a note that told me to leave my own home by midnight. I held up the crumpled paper, its words still etched in ink. Gasps rippled again. This is the gift I received from my son and his wife. Tell me, would any of you accept this from your children? The silence was suffocating. My son's face, crumpled tears filling his eyes. She reached for him, but he pulled his hand away, shame painting every line of his face. Her voice rose suddenly, shrill with desperation. She's lying. She's manipulating you all. She's jealous, bitter, afraid of being alone. None of this is true. I met her eyes with a calm she couldn't touch. Then prove it. Show us the deeds. Show us the legal papers with your names. Show us anything that says this house belongs to you. She froze. The room waited. She had nothing. And then the final twist. I pulled out one last letter, one my lawyer had given me only days before. And just so you all understand, I said, my voice steady, I have updated my will. Not one penny, not one brick, not one piece of furniture will go to those who tried to betray me. Every asset will be protected, and much of it will go to causes that protect elders from abuse. Betrayal has consequences, and mine are written in ink. The gasp that followed was louder than all the others. She staggered back, her face pale, her hands trembling. My son bowed his head, unable to meet my eyes. The room was heavy with judgment, the witnesses no longer neutral. I stood tall, the papers gathered once more. This is not vengeance, this is truth, and truth always finds its way to the light. Now I ask you, if you were me, standing in front of those who betrayed you, would you have revealed everything, or would you have spared them the shame? Comment 1 if you believe betrayal deserves exposure. Like this story, if you think silence protects only the guilty. Because that night, in front of family, friends, and witnesses, their lies burned to ash. And from those ashes, I rose not as a victim, but as the woman they could never erase. If the confrontation at the table was a storm, then what followed was the flood. Truth doesn't stay contained. Once it cracks open, it seeps into every corner, into every whisper, into every eye that has seen too much. I had pulled the mask off my betrayers in front of family and friends. But the real blow came when the witnesses began to speak, when the story slipped from our walls and entered the mouths of others. It started with Mrs. Keller, my neighbor, the same woman who had first warned me of the whispers through the kitchen window. She'd been invited that evening by my daughter-in-law, who wanted to parade her perfect family to outsiders. But instead of admiration, she now gave testimony. She stood up, her voice trembling, but firm. I heard them, she said, her eyes darting between me and the others at the table. I heard them planning to take her house. I heard the laughter, the words about old furniture. She's not lying. Every word she just told you is true. A murmur rippled across the room. People shifted in their chairs, exchanged glances, the weight of proof settling over them like heavy rain. My daughter-in-law's face went pale. Her lips pressed thin, but she couldn't silence the neighbor's voice. Then came the unexpected witness, my granddaughter. She stood suddenly, her little hands gripping the edge of the table, her eyes wide but unflinching. Mommy said, when Grandma moves, we'll get a pool. She blurted, her innocent voice cutting sharper than any accusation. But Daddy said, we don't have the money. The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the candles seemed to flicker with shock. My daughter-in-law tried to hush her, but the words were already out, hanging in the air, impossible to erase. One by one, others began to speak. A cousin admitted that she had overheard jokes at a previous gathering, jokes about how long until the house is ours. A friend shifted uncomfortably and confessed that my daughter-in-law had once asked her about senior homes in the area, laughing that I wouldn't resist much longer. The weight of their words spread like wildfire. No longer was it my voice against theirs. Now it was a chorus building, echoing, confirming. My betrayal had become undeniable, witnessed not just by my heart, but by the community that surrounded us. And then came the ripple effect. Stories began to spread beyond the table. The next morning, Mrs. Keller spoke to a group of neighbors in the street, her voice carrying with urgency. By the afternoon, whispers had reached the local church, the flower shop, the grocery store, where I had been a loyal customer for decades. Everywhere I went, eyes followed not with pity, but with a quiet solidarity. They knew my daughter-in-law had always thrived on appearances, on her polished image of perfection. But now the image was cracking her name, whispered with disgust instead of admiration. The one who tried to throw out her husband's mother, people said. The one who wanted the house, the money, everything. Even my son couldn't escape it. At work, colleagues who had attended the dinner retold the story in hushed voices. His silence at the table had been as damning as her laughter. The community no longer saw him as a man trapped by love. They saw him as complicit. For the first time, they were the ones isolated. For the first time, it wasn't me standing outside the glass watching the party. It was them. And I didn't need to raise my voice anymore because the witnesses had taken my truth and carried it for me. But the most powerful moment came a few days later when the pastor of our church approached me after service. He took my hands in his voice low but firm. "I've heard what happened. You've carried your burden with dignity, but you don't need to carry it alone. Families may betray us, but communities remember, and we stand with you." His words weren't just comfort, they were confirmation that the betrayal had crossed into the realm of public truth. No longer could they hide behind closed doors. No longer could they twist the story to make me seem senile, bitter, or ungrateful. The truth had escaped their grasp, and it was now a fire they could not control. Now I turn to you. If your betrayal was exposed not just to family, but to the world, would you feel relief, or would you feel shame for airing your wounds so publicly? Would you hide from the whispers, or would you stand tall and let them spread? Knowing that the guilty deserve no shadows to hide and comment one, if you believe truth must always be witnessed. Like this story, if you believe betrayal becomes real only when the world sees it. Because my betrayal was no longer mine alone. It was carried by neighbors, by children, by friends, and even strangers. And in their voices, my pain transformed into justice. The fire had spread, and it was consuming the lies that had been built around me. Once the fire spreads, there is no going back. Lies may burn slowly for a while, but once truth ignites them, they collapse into ash. That was what happened in the weeks that followed the confrontation. The house no longer rang with her laughter or her sharp commands. Instead, it echoed with silence, the heavy silence of shame. My daughter-in-law was the first to feel the weight. The friends who once admired her stopped visiting. The women from her book club, the ones who had giggled at her sharp comments about me, suddenly found excuses not to meet. At the grocery store, she was no longer greeted with warm smiles, but with sidelong glances, hushed whispers that followed her down the aisles. Her perfect image shattered, replaced by the label she could never shake, the woman who tried to throw her husband's mother into the street. My son could not escape either. At work, colleagues spoke in whispers behind his back. His silence at the table, his failure to defend his own mother, became the story that defined him. Clients pulled away, promotions disappeared, and the man who had once walked with easy confidence now carried himself like someone perpetually bracing against a storm. His silence, once his shield, had become his prison. And then there were the children. Innocent, confused, they began asking questions. "Why don't people like Mommy anymore?" my granddaughter asked one afternoon, her eyes wide. My son had no answer. He could not explain that betrayal leaves stains no one else can wash away. But the consequences did not stop with whispers and shame. The law has a way of catching up when lines are crossed. My lawyer, Mr. Dalton, filed notices securing every piece of property in my name, placing restrictions to prevent any unauthorized transfer. The documents they had prepared, the ones they hoped to trick me into signing, became evidence of their intent. Fraud, coercion, elder abuse. These were no longer just words. They were charges whispered in courtrooms and offices. They tried to deny it, of course. She claimed I was confused, unstable, vindictive. But witnesses lined up, neighbors, relatives, even my granddaughter's innocent words. Piece by piece, the truth was stitched together until their denials unraveled completely. The judgment wasn't just legal, it was social. The church refused her leadership in events the community pulled back and invitations dried up. No amount of perfume could cover the stench of betrayal, and my son, though he begged me for forgiveness, could not escape the truth of what he had allowed. Forgiveness is one thing, forgetting is another. For me, the aftermath was not triumph, but release. I moved into the apartment I had prepared a place that was mine alone, free from whispers and threats. I decorated it with the photographs I had saved, with the quilts my mother had sewn, with the letters my husband had written me long ago. Each item was a piece of my history, a reminder that my worth was never theirs to define. And yet the house they had tried to steal, remained under my control. I visited often, not to gloat, but to breathe in the walls I had once feared would be stripped from me. Each visit was a victory, not of vengeance, but of survival. Now I ask you, if your betrayers lost everything, if their names were stained, if their ambitions crumbled, would you feel pity, or would you feel justice had been served? Comment 1 if you believe betrayal must always have consequences. Like this story, if you believe dignity is worth more than forgiveness. Because the aftermath of betrayal is never clean. It leaves ruins. But in those ruins, I found something stronger than revenge. I found proof that silence, patience, and truth can outlast even the deepest cruelty. When a storm finally passes, the world looks different. Streets glisten with rain branches, lie broken, and the air smells sharper, cleaner. That was how my life felt in the months after the truth came out. The storm of betrayal had torn through everything I thought was solid, but what remained was stronger than I ever imagined. I did not return to live in that house. Though the law and the truth had secured it in my name, it no longer felt like home. Too many nights had been poisoned within its walls. Too many whispers had seeped into its corners. Instead, I chose my apartment across town, a place they never touched, never stained with their cruelty. There, I built something new. The mornings became my favorite. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, the sunlight spilling across the small kitchen, watching the city wake up. Neighbors would wave as they passed, not with pity, but with respect. "You're stronger than most," one of them told me once. I smiled not because I felt strong every day, but because I had learned that strength isn't about never bending. It's about standing back up after you've been forced to your knees. My grandchildren came often. At first, they arrived shy, confused, carrying the weight of questions no child should have to ask. But children are resilient, more resilient than adults often give them credit for. Soon, their laughter filled my apartment, echoing off the walls like music. We baked cookies together, painted messy pictures, and read stories at night. In their small hands, I felt the future untouched, unbroken, ready to be guided by something better than lies. As for my son, our relationship became complicated but not impossible. He came one evening, his eyes hollow, his shoulders slumped, carrying not papers this time, but guilt. He begged me to forgive him. I was weak, he admitted, his voice breaking. I let her speak for me. I let her think for me. And I betrayed you with my silence. I looked at him for a long time. I saw both the boy I had raised and the man who had hurt me. Forgiveness is not easy, not after betrayal. But I told him this: I forgive you, but I will not forget. Trust is not given freely again. You must earn it brick by brick, just as you allowed it to crumble stone by stone. He nodded, tears on his face, and I believed him, not because his words were perfect, but because shame had finally cracked him open. The daughter-in-law, she vanished from our lives. The last I heard, she moved far away, her reputation trailing behind her like a shadow she could not escape. Perhaps she will rebuild somewhere new. Perhaps she will poison someone else's home with her ambition. But not mine. Never again mine. In the quiet of my new life, I found something I hadn't felt in years: dignity. Not the fragile dignity that relies on how others treat you, but the deep, unshakable dignity that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone rewrite it. They tried to erase me. They tried to turn my birthday into my eviction. But instead, that night became the rebirth of my strength. And now, as I share this with you, I want you to ask yourself, what would you do if betrayal came not from strangers, but from the very people you fed, clothed, and raised? Would you collapse under their cruelty? Or would you rise even if it meant standing alone and show them that dignity cannot be stolen? Comment 1 if you believe no parent, no elder, no human should ever be discarded. Like this story, if you believe that betrayal may wound, but it cannot win when truth is on your side. Because my story is not just mine. It belongs to every person who has ever been told they are worthless, every elder who has been pushed aside, every voice that has been silenced. Remember, this silence is not weakness. Patience is not surrender. And truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds the light. Some victories do not come with cheers or applause. They come quietly in the peace of your own heart, in the sound of your grandchildren's laughter, in the knowledge that you survived what was meant to destroy you. That is my resolution. That is my message.